Okay, great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's session. My name is Jenny. I'm the careers consultant for graduate transitions here at the university, and I'm joined today by my colleagues Miriam and Emma from Alumni Relations and a fabulous panel of alumni working within banking and finance who have come here today to share their insights and experiences with you all. So if we just move on to the next slide, we've got 1 hour together today. The session will be recorded and available on the Career Service YouTube channel within about a week. But today's session is really a unique opportunity for you to speak to alumni working within finance and banking, so you can gain exclusive insider insights and build up your sector knowledge. It's also an opportunity for you to boost your network in a friendly, quite informal environment. So I'll soon hand over to our alumni panelists to introduce themselves. They have all volunteered their time this evening to share their experiences and knowledge of working within banking and finance. And then you can ask them questions. Because today's session is being recorded, you can either unmute yourself and ask the question if you wish, or you can direct the questions to Miriam in the chat, and she will read them out. So you'll have about 30 to 40 minutes to do that, and then we'll close at about 5:55 with a couple of some more information about further support and resources. So before we get started, please can you just register, and that will enable us to send you the slides and also keep your Career Connect record up to date. So the bit.ly link is on the screen at the moment, and you can also scan the QR code. So I'll just give you a couple of moments to do that now. Okay, great. Thank you. So if we'll move on to our next slide, we can welcome our alumni panelists. So I'm just going to say thank you so much for joining us this evening, especially after a long day's work. We really appreciate it. I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves in order of the screen. If you could take 2 or 3 minutes to provide a brief overview of your career journey so far and your day-to-day responsibilities in your role, that would be fantastic. So we'll start with Chantel, if that's okay.
Thanks, Jenny, and hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining the call today. My name's Chantel Kelly, and I work in the Institutional Sales and Client Relationship Management team at Lazard. That's a very long way just to say that I do sales on a day-to-day basis. I'm either talking directly to clients or trying to understand what's important to the market, whether that's attending conferences, seminars, working on investment thought pieces of what we think the outlook is going to be for a specific country or a specific type of people. My career journey is quite different. I guess I graduated in 2014, and when I first graduated, I did a graduate program at Goldman's, which was fantastic, but wasn't for me in terms of the role that I was doing. Completely hated it. So I left and went to asset management. I basically heard through the grapevine that it was a really good way to get a bit more of a balance in terms of not working, 12 to 14 hours a day, but actually being able to have a life and still be working in finance. So in 2016, I went to JP Morgan Asset Management, working in the sales team over there, and then I've kind of been in this function since then. Really excited to be here and kind of be part of this panel to share my experiences with you. Thanks, Jenny.
That's great. Thank you so much, Chantel. You're very welcome today. Moving on to Malcolm.
Hi, everyone. I'm Malcolm. I currently work at AGCO. So AGCO is a US company that owns a load of tractor brands. So you may have heard of Massey Ferguson, for example, which is one of our brands. As an internal auditor, my job is to essentially make sure that our accountants and underlying finance team are behaving themselves. In other words, we are responsible for making sure that our annual reports are a clear and fair reflection of our actual performance. So prior to that, I worked at KPMG for 3.5 years as an external auditor, where essentially I did the same role, but I would go in as an external auditor and review accounts for various clients. And I've been with AGCO now for 2 years. And I guess similar to Chantel, I left KPMG because the hours were quite long, and I wanted more of a 9-to-5 life. So thankfully I've got that now.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Malcolm. Welcome today. And moving on to Alistair.
Hi, hello everyone. My name is Alistair McGibbon. I work for CPP Investment Board, which is actually the Canada Pension Plan Investment Board. So what that is basically a large institutional pool of money. Everyone who works in Canada pays money into this fund that they have to. And then we invest that money, and then when they retire, hopefully there's a nest egg for them, which will be paid out from the fund. My job is basically I'm a fund manager, so I manage a team of portfolio managers, focus mainly on what we call the macro side, which is taking views on things like equities and bonds, currencies, commodities, that kind of thing, and trying to make money by doing that. What you can see behind me is Toronto. You may be able to see some of the snow. We have offices in about 7 different countries, including the UK and London. We have about 200 people there, but most of us are based here in Toronto. So I graduated way back in 1994. I did a master's in economics, and my first job was actually at the Bank of England. So I started off as an economist at the Bank of England, working for what was then Mervyn King in his role as head chief economist before he became governor. And I worked there for 7 years, really enjoyed it. But I wanted to get into fund management at some point. So I went to a firm called UBS, and particularly the asset management division of UBS. They're a big Swiss bank, basically. And I worked there for another 10 years, and then came over to Canada in 2008.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alistair. It certainly is a beautiful background. And yes,
Hi everyone. So my name's Yusuf. At the moment, I'm currently an associate director in VAT at a company called Grant Thornton, and they're essentially a large professional services company. In terms of my career, so I graduated from Manchester back in 2015, so 8 years ago now. And after graduation, I did a graduate scheme at Grant Thornton. I was there for about 5 years, 4.5, 5 years. Had a couple of promotions, became a fully qualified chartered tax advisor, and then I left and went in-house, as we call it, to work for Amazon. So I was essentially doing the same thing, so still doing VAT, and what that consisted of was advising predominantly large multinational businesses on how to manage their VAT affairs. And then after Amazon, an opportunity came along for me to do something called an MBA. So an MBA is like a special kind of master's where you learn kind of broad skills on how to manage a business. So this includes kind of finance, accounting, marketing, and soft skills as well. And normally you need to have maybe 3 to 5 years of managerial experience before you get on it. So you can't do it straight after your undergrad. And my MBA is quite unique in that it's specialized in the football industry. So a third of my modules of what I study are football specific. And once I started the MBA, I actually came back to Grant Thornton, where I started my career after graduation. And I'm currently still there, but I work on a part-time basis whilst doing my MBA at the same time. I'm not doing the MBA in Manchester. I'm actually doing it in Liverpool. Manchester's a better city, but I'll come up to Liverpool to do it, as they're the only place that did the MBA that specialised in football. And that's my career so far.
that's great. Thank you, Yusuf. It sounds like a fantastic MBA, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of questions around it. You're very welcome here today. And last but not least, Janet.
Hi everyone, I'm Janet, and I am the most recent grad out of the panel. I graduated last year actually. I studied PPE with a year abroad where I majored in economics and politics. I currently am an analyst at BlackRock. I'm part of their graduate program. So I'm working in their public equities division, working as a product specialist, which is essentially someone who works alongside the PMs, the portfolio managers, works on the funds, the fund strategy, and sort of acts as that kind of liaises with the PMs and the clients and the sales teams, and kind of act as that sort of glue between all of the different teams. So it's been really exciting so far.
That's fab. Thank you so much, Janet. And thank you to all of our panelists. So now we're going to hand over to you, the participants, our students and graduates, to ask any questions that you have for our panelists. I should note, if you have just joined, please can you register your attendance via the bit.ly link that I've just put in the chat. And in terms of questions, if you would like to put your question to the panel directly, just use the hand up function, and we will enable you to unmute yourself, turn on your camera and ask your question. You can also direct any questions you would like to put to the panel anonymously by direct messaging Miriam. So please do that to help us get started. But just to kick us off, I'd just like to ask the panel in general. I know we have various levels of experience and expertise, and lots of different degree programs as well. Did you always know that you wanted to go into finance or banking, or was that something that you sort of gradually gained an interest in throughout university or afterwards? I'll just open up to the whole panel.
I can take a crack at this one.
Thanks, Malcolm.
So I graduated in 2017 with a degree in geology, and my plan was to get a job in oil and gas, potentially as an exploratory geologist looking for oil. But at 2017, at that point in time, the price of oil was considerably lower than it is today, which meant that BP, for example, was only going to hire one graduate on its graduate scheme, and it was a PhD minimum. So I thought, that's probably not going to work out for me. So I just applied for a role at KPMG because they were on campus advertising audit roles. And I don't know if anyone knows, but basically audit is one of the functions that takes on the most graduates because they need a high body count in that department. So I thought my chances would be quite high of getting a decent grad role. So here I am around 6 years later as a chartered accountant. So it wasn't really my ambition to become an accountant, but I guess it pays the bills.
That's great. Thank you, Malcolm. Alistair, did you want to chip in there?
Yeah, I was just going to give another perspective. So I studied economics, and I kind of figured out that I wanted to do something that involved economics. I really enjoyed it. I looked at insurance at one point as a potential industry, but the more I spoke to them, the less interested I became. Mm-hmm. And I kind of narrowed down my options to really few places that hired people to do economics, and the Bank of England and the Treasury were two of the biggest employers of economists, and so I focused on those two, and I was offered a job at both of them, and I took the Bank of England. I think it paid like £1,000 a year more or something, which was what effectively swayed me, I guess. And so that was my first goal, and then once I got into the Bank of England, I started thinking about sort of next steps from there. But I didn't have a kind of initial plan all laid out for my entire career. It's like first priority was to get my foot in the door somewhere, and then take it from there and try and understand the different options as you gain that experience.
That's great. Thank you, Alistair, for giving us that alternate perspective. Janet, did you want to give your input there?
Yeah, so I had, even though I sort of studied PPE, I didn't actually want to get into finance until literally, I think it was like my final year. I changed from wanting to do law when I first joined, when I first started at uni. Then I wanted to move into the business side of tech, and I did an internship at a tech AI firm in Berlin. Then I realized it kind of wasn't for me. And then I did some work experience, some more work experience in a different tech company. Then I realized maybe this just isn't for me. And then after that, I kind of broadened out and kind of tried out finance. After sort of going to events like this, actually, during my time at uni, I realized that it could be something that I would be quite interested in. And I think especially over the pandemic, I really got into the markets and sort of how, companies were affected by what was going on, the geopolitics, and just it was just so fascinating to me. So I knew I kind of wanted to work in that sort of side of finance. And like I mentioned, going to sort of different conferences and career talks, I realized I kind of narrowed down where I kind of wanted to work in, like sort of which companies and which sort of specific areas.
Brilliant, thank you. It's good to know that these sorts of sessions were useful and aid in your career decision making. So hopefully some good inspiration for our participants today. So a couple of people have been sending through questions to Miriam, which is great. Thank you. Keep them coming. I'll just start with the very top. So someone has a direct question for Chantel. Did you find it difficult transitioning from your previous role that you weren't so sure of in sales to the role that you're in now? And what were the steps that you took to make that transition?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think at the time, like when I first even heard of Goldman's, I was 19. And I just wanted a job. The statistics were very damning about, going to university, coming out of a load of debt and not actually having a job at the end of it. So I didn't care where I worked. I was just more focused on, I want to say I'm a graduate, like that's employed anywhere. And because of that, it just meant that I didn't really do my due diligence into the actual functions of a team that I would be joining. It was just, this company was offering a grad scheme. I think at the time it would paid like, I think 32,000. And I was like, oh my God, that is like a millionaire. Like I've never seen that kind of money before. So I just kind of focused on the wrong things. And then it was very obvious, like within the first 6 months to myself and even to my team, that firstly, the internship and the day-to-day job are very different. So the internship was very sexy to kind of use, like not really a PC word, but it was very much their marketing and wining and dining you, taking you out. I'd heard so much, good things about the grad program that it really just distracted me from actually you're trying to build a career. You're not just trying to get, a free flight to New York, for example. So once I took a step back from that perspective, I actually realized one thing that I'm really good at is networking and meeting people and just kind of accumulating just different people from different backgrounds, all within finance. Finance was definitely something I was still, passionate about, but I knew I was just in the wrong function. And at the time I'd had the conversation with my manager to see if I could move internally. And it's not as easy as one would like to think it is. So I basically started to network outside of Goldman. There were so many local coffee shops. I literally would speak to anyone in a suit and just kind of hope they worked in finance. And that's kind of how like blunt I can be about that. And really through that conversation, I'd got a heads up that JP Morgan were going to be hosting a networking event, but they would be effectively just doing a mass hiring like evening. And if I was interested, just drop the gentleman my CV and he'll be able to put me in touch with HR should I be someone that was, semi-interesting to the different hiring managers. So I definitely would say it was tough in the sense that I did, conventional applications to kind of get myself seen, but it just gets tough. Like once you've got your foot in the door somewhere, then recruitment agencies become very dogmatic in terms of the types of roles that you can go for. So they kind of thought I would want something very similar to what I had done previously. And I was like, no, I want to do something different. I want to use a different kind of skill set that I've got no experience in, but trust me, I'll be amazing kind of thing. So very, very hard sell to do it that way. So the networking avenue was where I really found I would be a lot more successful. And that was how I was able to literally work the room. And I made it, my aim to meet every single hiring manager in the room, every single HR person in the room. I didn't get caught in any conversations that wouldn't be meaningful to myself. So I kind of made sure that the people that were just like myself looking for a job, we definitely could catch up at any time, but the ones that were hiring that would potentially give me an interview, I made sure that they saw me if they were busy, and we'd agreed to catch up afterwards. And it was really by me being incredibly proactive that I was able to get the first interview at JP, because at the time it was kind of, do I do a grad program again? And I really didn't want to do that, but I still wanted to, make a go at doing something different. So I definitely would say if you end up taking a role and it may not be your dream role, initially, it doesn't mean that's the end. I guess it just means that when you go through any processes, that you just have to really look inwards and really think, why me, why this role, why this company, and work on really kind of selling that, transition story. And I guess the good thing about myself is that nobody in my team has my background. Nobody really understands, how banking works. The ability to be able to flex and actually work, quite longer hours is something that I've kind of been almost conditioned to do. So kind of playing to some of the strengths that I had in my, earlier roles into what I do today has really worked in my favor. And hopefully that helps someone. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you. Thanks, Chantel. So a couple of questions again from the audience. What does a typical day look like? So if we could have maybe one or two perspectives on that, that's for the whole panel. Yusuf, would you like to tackle this one?
Yeah, for me, so I guess at the moment, my typical day is quite unique, given I'm studying part-time and MBA. So on my working day, what I tend to do is in the mornings, I will normally speak with a few of the more junior members of my team to see if there's anything important that's gone on in the week, particularly when I've been out of the office. Then I'll normally review kind of what's gone on in the wider market and in the legal kind of sector. So VAT and tax is very intertwined with the legal world. So we frequently have to catch up on tax cases, like some of the most popular kind of tax cases that you probably haven't heard of, but they tend to hit a range of areas. Like a really popular one a few years ago was Jaffa cakes. So there was a court case about whether Jaffa cakes were a cake or a biscuit. And this actually impacted what rate of VAT they'd be taxed at. So we get a lot of these on a weekly basis almost. So we tend to review them. And then that normally takes up my morning. And then I normally spend the afternoons getting back to clients. So the kind of things we deliver to clients can be reports, a lot of phone calls. Sometimes clients want presentations or trainings for their members of staff. I also get regularly involved in training our junior members of our team as well. Sometimes going out to clients to meet them and find out about their tax issues face to face. And then I tend to wind down about 6, and my day normally starts about 8:45. So quite standard hours, not too long. Although whilst I've been doing my MBA part-time, work has allowed me to be very flexible. So some days I finish early and some days I work a bit later.
That's great. Thank you for giving that perspective from studying while working. That's really great. Thank you. There's a general question here. Is there a career pathway into finance and banking with a geography degree? So this particular student focuses on human geographies with an interest in economic geographies and geographies of finance. But they want to know, is there demand for those with a humanities background, or are banking and finance firms, in your experience, mainly looking at those with sort of maths, economics, business degrees, etc.? So I guess, Janet, you did a PPE, wasn't it? That's within the Faculty of Humanities, isn't it?
Yeah. So so I'd say PPE is basically sort of in the humanities area. I would say there definitely are pathways. I didn't really find it was an issue. I think you kind of do have to play, like sort of what Chantel was saying, you kind of have to have your story and kind of be able to kind of persuade the hiring managers as to why you kind of want to be in this industry, first of all, why you want the role and why they should hire you. And I think if you know yourself kind of exactly why you want to, I think it's pretty easy to kind of convince someone else. But you just kind of have to ask yourself and be honest with yourself and kind of figure out why you want to work in the industry. But I haven't found that, there are quite a few people who are, economics background, pure economics, mathsy, kind of STEM subject backgrounds, but there are quite a lot of people who are, if I even think about in my team, some people might have studied like classics or, I know there's a couple of people who did geography. Like it kind of just depends. But I think it just matters more about your passions and how hard you're willing to work, essentially.
Oh, great, thank you. Let's see. So there's another question actually here for Yusuf. Is your MBA sponsored by a company, and why did they choose you to specialise in the football industry?
Yeah, that's a good question. Many MBAs are sponsored by companies. Mine actually wasn't, but it sort of is in a way. So it wasn't sponsored by my employer, but there was a scholarship opportunity being provided by Sky and the kind of the anti-racist football charity, Kick It Out. So they were Sky had this budget and they're working with Kick It Out. And one of the things they wanted to do was address kind of the lack of Black and Asian minority British-born individuals that have senior roles in football. So football as an industry, well, like many industries, at the top tends to be predominantly white and white men, middle-aged. And I guess what makes football a bit more unique is that when you look at the players in the UK, about 40% of players are non-white. So we're kind of over, the proportion of non-white players is very high relative to the general population. But that isn't shown and reflected at the top of the industry. So I applied for the scholarship, was fortunately successful. And so therefore Sky pay the tuition for me. And then in return, I've got to do kind of a couple like media days for Sky, and we get like a day out in Sky Sports. So far it's gone really well. So yeah, so as a result of that, I actually had to quit my job at Amazon because I couldn't do my Amazon role whilst I was doing the MBA. But again, Grant Thornton were nice enough and flexible enough to allow me to work for them part-time.
Fantastic, thank you. A question here for Chantel. Did you find it difficult? Oh no, sorry, I've already read that one out. Apologies, Chantel. A question here for Alistair. From the point of view of someone who is further into their career, what advice can you give to those applying to a role in banking and finance straight from university to really make themselves stand out during the recruitment process?
Yeah, I mean, that's in one sense, there's the obvious things. I mean, recruiters will look for someone with really high potential. And so if you have to put yourself in their shoes, and that they've received in many cases, thousands of applications for a few jobs. And so they will look for something on the resume or the CV that really stands out from the crowd. And that could be an academic thing. It could be that you've done really well academically, or it could be that you've done extracurricular things that are unusual, or you've done really good internships. So it can take a variety of different forms, I think. But it's looking for that potential. How do you stand out from the crowd? Because in some ways, I think getting that first interview is half the battle. Because once you've got the interview, then you have a chance to express yourself and really kind of highlight your strengths. Whereas a CV or resume is kind of a very blunt tool. It can be difficult to judge someone just from that. So try and highlight things that are a little bit maybe unique, a little bit different from the typical resume, or areas where you really think you show a lot of potential.
Thank you, Alistair. And while we have you, there's another question here for yourself. What are some of the biggest differences working abroad in Canada in comparison to the UK? And then there's a follow-up question. Does the role become more demanding as seniority increases? And how do you deal with the pressure to perform consistently?
Okay, Yeah, 3 or 4 questions. So, in terms of living abroad, I mean, when it comes to finance, there's a few kind of big centers of finance around the world. So London is obviously one, New York, probably Chicago, Tokyo, and to a lesser extent, probably Toronto. And I think there's actually quite a lot of commonality between those. They're all big urban centers, very cosmopolitan. And so when you come to somewhere like Toronto, like if I look at the people in my team, I think I have like maybe 12, 13 different nationalities reporting into me. It's very mixed. And obviously English is the main language. And so there's a lot of commonality, a lot of things that don't feel too strange. I mean, there are small things that are different, like they play ice hockey and baseball instead of cricket and rugby and things, but in terms of the big things, there's actually a lot of commonality. So it's not as odd as you might think, although it's still very interesting to be in a different culture and get a taste for how people live in different places. So if you enjoy traveling, it's definitely something I think is worth experiencing at some point. It just kind of enriches your career a bit, gives you some different perspectives. And I could give a very long answer on that on the second question around how things change as you progress. I think the main way I'd summarize it is when you start your career and you're working for someone, you're focused on doing things like research or analysis and presenting those things to people. As you get more senior, you're managing people, you spend a lot more time listening and trying to help people. So you have to sometimes just get out of their way. That's the best way to help them. Other times you have to be more proactive, but you go from kind of doing things to enabling other people to do things and helping them and listening to them. So kind of the nature of the job is very different at some point. There's an inflection point when it changes. And that probably happens at different times for different people, but it is a different job. And it's less about then your kind of technical skills and more about your kind of interpersonal and soft skills. And so those are very important. And they become more important as you progress.
Thank you, Alistair. And the last little tag on to that was how do you deal with the pressure to perform consistently?
I think the others can probably comment on this too. At the beginning, it's kind of intense because you're being, everything you do is kind of being scrutinized and feed into a kind of big assessment at the end of every year, and you get graded and you're compared against your peers, and so that's quite an intense process. But you get used to it, I think, and you over time it becomes less of an intimidating thing. That's how it works, and everyone is in the same boat, and you kind of figure out the rules of the game. And at some point, it just becomes something you don't even really think about consciously. You know what high performance means, and you just have to demonstrate it. So it's hard at the beginning, but I think it does become a bit more natural.
Thank you. There's a question here to the whole panel. How often do you use the skills that you gained through your degree? For example, is it a day-to-day basis, or do you use them more on an ad hoc basis? Malcolm, would you like to take this one? I know obviously did geology, but in terms of soft skills or transferable skills?
Yeah, I think the biggest skill for me was report writing. So in geology, you have to look at a fairly large set of data and then come up with some sort of interpretation and then document your findings or conclusions based off of that data. My role as an auditor is fairly similar, where I'll speak to people to understand what they do, but also then review and extract from the accounting software and actually drill down to what's been done. And then I'll have to write a report to explain what was done, and then a follow-up report as to how we would potentially have to fix any errors that I've identified. So I think for me, it was mainly writing concisely and was quite quite a useful tool.
Brilliant, thank you. A question to anyone who did a graduate scheme: what was the application process like for you? Is there anyone who'd like to take that one?
Yeah,
well, it's probably changed since my day, but I did the graduate scheme at the Bank of England, and the application process was basically you sent in your CV, and then they did a first round interview on the campus, and then they invited the people that got through that down to London we spent 2 days in what they call a selection centre, where they did lots of kind of tests of various kinds, like entry exercises and group discussions, presentation, some IQ tests and things. And so we did that for a couple of days, and then that was the basis of the job offer, whether or not you got through that. So I don't know if they still do it that way, but that's how it used to be.
Thank you. Malcolm, were you going to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'm just going to say that I know at KPMG they had to streamline the graduate process because they had one of the worst processes, where it was first round interview, second round interview, then in-person interview, and then an assessment centre, and it was pretty drawn out. So I know in my year it was the first year where they streamlined the process. So it was just an online numeracy test and a verbal reasoning test, and then you just had to record a video of yourself answering 5 questions that they gave you. And then the final stage was just an assessment day, which was a mix of group exercises, a written, I wouldn't say exam, just a written exercise, and then a partner interview. All I would say on that is the career service is really good. So they do mock assessment days, and the group exercise that we did in the mock assessment day was identical to the one that I actually did on the real thing. So I would strongly encourage everyone to go to the career service and attend those mock assessments and sit a mock interview with the careers department. They're really, really good at what they do. So I can't stress that enough.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Malcolm said, I think one thing I discovered is that practice, you do get better with practice with those things. And so if you can practice them, it is really helpful.
Yeah, 100% agreed.
Brilliant, thank you. A question for Chantel. How did you prepare for the commercial awareness related questions, from moving sort of to sales and to more finance?
Yeah, I guess I just got plugged into a lot of news outlets. I think is the kind of the first way to do that, and to just ask people questions. So if there was something that I saw on Bloomberg, I just would ask 3 people the same question, like, hey, what do you think, like, the inflation print is rising, is that a cause for concern? And then you kind of get a panel of different views about the same topic. And I guess the most important thing is not necessarily knowing all of the detail. You just need to know at a very high level elements to be conversational. So the quicker you can just be conversational in a topic, I would bank that, and I wouldn't move into some of the granular detail, because it doesn't necessarily add any more of she knows what she's talking about in that kind of sense. So what I tended to do is to actually just look at the news of the last week, because that does dominate a lot of the small talk within the office, particularly if it does relate to the teams that I was interviewing with, just to kind of show them that I had noticed certain key articles that had come out in the news quite recently. And then also just by following up after the interviews to kind of say, we spoke about this topic, this is just the evolution of the conversation that we had. So it could be, let's take the Ukraine invasion, for example, and if there's a significant development that happens there, by basically following up with one of the interviewers around that topic, and then kind of getting their views and continuing to kind of almost build up a bit of a crib sheet around, key topics and key themes that do come up. And one way that I did do that is I would kind of like track inflation, for example. And for a very, very, very long time, inflation was effectively a ghost that nobody really kind of understood. And everybody was saying the probability of, rates rising is increasing, but we hadn't really seen the impact of that. But once you start to kind of track different people's opinions on the same topic, then you start to become a bit more aware of what that really means for you, and just trying to break topics down into a manageable way, and trying to just if you don't know, just kind of asking someone and just be very curious about a topic and kind of say, I don't even know why this is making headline news, but once you've got that understanding, really making sure that you do ask yourself why, and why it's important, and how you can just make it something that is a bit more relatable to yourself, because in our industry there's so much jargon, it's ridiculous, so how you can kind of take away all of that jargon and just make it to seem a little bit more understandable is what I would suggest.
Thank you, Chantel. Thank you. A question to Janet: what do you like most about your role? Very straightforward.
I feel like I like how every day is different. I feel like that's quite a standard answer for a lot of people in finance. But I feel like in my role, for example, what I do day to day is very affected by what's going on in the market. So I remember when I joined on desk in September, the whole LDI crisis and the market's going crazy kind of happened in October, and I work in the UK markets. So that was a massive change for me. And I remember like day to day, I had to work a bit longer. I had, a lot more responsibility straight off the bat. And I had to learn a lot quicker, which I looking back, I actually am really glad that it all happened. In the moment, it was quite stressful, but I'm really glad it happened. But I think that that is probably the thing I enjoy the most, just, how much it varies day to day. I'd say most of my favorite sort of part of my day might be the sort of commentary writing. I really enjoy having to kind of take all of that information based on company performance, the market, and general fund performance, kind of putting it all into one digestible sort of document. I really do enjoy that. But I'd say I kind of just enjoy anything that's kind of thrown at me.
Thank you. Yusuf, what is the recruitment process like at Grant Thornton? I know that's a very broad question, but for your role, what was it like?
Yeah, so as a graduate, it was very similar to kind of the new process that Malcolm said he went through at KPMG. So for memory, I had to do kind of like a first kind of stage, kind of written kind of assessment, and that was basically why Grant Thornton and why the role, whilst attaching my CV. And then after that, we had to do kind of the numerical and verbal reasoning tests. Once you got through that, there was a video kind of interview. So again, very similar to what Malcolm said, you had to log in onto this online kind of portal, and they'd send you questions, and you'd have like a set time to answer them. Once you got through that, then you'd go through to the assessment center. So it was a day in London at their headquarters, where we did a group exercise. There was an in-tray exercise. So this is where you've got like ours was on the computer, but I know, so ours was technically an e-tray, but you kind of log on to this kind of software, and you have multiple emails and information sent, and you've got like a set time to reply to them, and normally write a report as well. We did that, and then in the afternoon we had a partner interview. And then once you got through that, you go home, and they'd let you know within the next couple of days whether or not you were successful.
That's great. Thank you for that overview. A question for Malcolm. It's quite a long one, so just let me know if you need me to repeat anything. Do you think that your role at KPMG set you up well for your current role and being able to be more selective with the roles you go for in future? So the example they gave was, the experience that you got at KPMG, the years of working lots of hours. If you could go back, would you have gone straight into a 9-to-5, or, was that experience really worthwhile in the end?
Yeah, I think starting off at one of the big four firms is pretty good, just to be on your CV if you're looking to get into the accountancy side of finance rather than the banking side. And then once you become a chartered accountant and pass all your exams at the Big Four, your LinkedIn inbox just becomes inundated with recruiters saying, do you want to come work here? This is what we'll offer. These are the hours. This is the bonus. This is the pension, etc. So from that perspective, yes, I would say it was helpful because you get to see accountancy standards that are only really appropriate at very large businesses. So, for example, if you had started at a smaller accountancy firm, you probably wouldn't be experiencing, I don't know, maybe things like hedge accounting or like hedging pension risk with various swap options. Like you wouldn't see things like that at a smaller firm. So that experience is quite valuable to bigger firms. If you know, so it will open the door to a bigger firm or a smaller firm. But yeah, I would say it was a good tool to get a lot of options in your inbox and LinkedIn from recruiters, because they just have a knack of knowing. Well, they just know when the graduate intake have passed all their exams, and then they'll start messaging you and calling you. They somehow find your number on a switchboard, or they'll find your mobile. They'll find your mobile number and they'll just start calling. They're pretty pragmatic in trying to earn their fee.
Thank you, Malcolm. I think we have a time for maybe 2 or 3 more questions. The ones left are more general questions. This is a question to the whole panel, so feel free to answer if you'd like to. How do you deal with not getting a job offer? I know that's something that a lot of students, well, we all struggle with. Sometimes you prepare for an interview or an application and you don't get the job. How do you deal with that?
I would want to answer this one. I would probably just say, don't take it personally. And I will say that through being on the other side of the table. So now when I interview graduates coming through, it isn't because of the graduate, it's just the team dynamic, the team fit, and it's actually nothing really personal to you as an individual. So as crazy as it may sound, just be grateful that they didn't give you the job, because if you did get the opportunity that you think you wanted, you probably would be very underwhelmed, disappointed quite quickly when either the tasks aren't exactly what you find joy in and find exciting, and you just won't be as successful as your peers, given they're doing a role that is actually really suited to them and their skill set. So I definitely would be not happy, but just kind of understand that it isn't a personal thing. And then also I would say just take time to reflect and think about what it was during that process as objectively as you can, that maybe made the interviewer have less conviction in your profile, in your background, in your rationale for joining that team, which is really important. So then when you do the next interview, you've actually learned and processed what's happened previously. And one thing that I try to do is to give myself a bit of time between interviews, just to make sure that I've actually got enough time to kind of reflect on what went wrong and how I can do things better. Because from my perspective, I think, applying for jobs is a marathon, not a sprint. And you just need to make sure that you've got enough energy to, maintain that level of engagement throughout the process. When, things do go well, and obviously you either progress to the next stage or you get the job. Or similarly, if you actually find out that this opportunity isn't for yourself, just to make sure that you've got enough bandwidth to kind of process what inevitably is going to happen to us all. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Another question here. What extracurricular activities would you recommend getting involved in as a student to boost your skills? So is there anything in particular that you did that went down well in interviews or applications?
I can kind of add to this. question. So in my final year, I joined one of the investment funds. It's like a student-run investment fund. It's called Mutis. But I was on the ESG side of the investment fund. And that was incredible for my application process, particularly because I did PPE and it wasn't as like technical as, let's say, if I did statistics or maths. I think it was great because being part of that investment fund, I actually gained skills in sort of research and stock picking, and I learned how to sort of create a stock pitch, and I learned about the different aspects of working at an investment fund and what I needed to know before I came into the interview process when I was applying in my final year. So I would definitely recommend, if you are sort of looking into the sort of research side, or whether you're looking into buy side or sell side, if you are looking to become like a research equity analyst, for example, definitely join an investment fund. There's quite a few around uni from what I remember. There's probably even more this year than there were last year, but that was probably the best decision I made sort of during my time at uni.
That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that advice. Alistair, did you want to add something there?
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I didn't do anything extracurricular that was very useful, but I think what Janet said is, I totally agree with that. That's when I'm looking at resumes, that's the kind of thing that kind of flags that someone's serious and interested in the subject. And it may not seem like a big thing, but if you've got two similar candidates, that will, at the margin, that one's going to be the one you select. And you want to give yourself that edge. And so going back to the point I was making earlier about trying to stand out a little bit, that's exactly the kind of thing that I think would do that.
Great, thank you. So just sort of, we have about 5 minutes left. So just to bring the session to a close, can I just ask each of the panelists what your key piece of advice would be to students and graduates? So perhaps something that you wish you had have known when you graduated or when you were at university, or something that you know now based on experience. So I'll just go in the order of my screen, if that's okay. Malcolm, would you be able to start?
Sure. So I think for me, the advice that I always give to people that ask me this question is, if you think about the panelists today, without sounding rude or a bit left field, but I think one of the reasons that we do these events is we like to, let's say, talk about ourselves. And I think most people generally like to talk about themselves. So bearing that in mind, don't be scared to reach out to people on LinkedIn that have been to the same university as you or have done the same degree as you, and just say, I'm applying for a role at your firm. Would you mind speaking to me about your experiences and what your day-to-day role is like? I think you'd be pleasantly surprised at how many people would actually say yes to that, because I think a lot of us do enjoy talking about ourselves, and you can gain quite invaluable information that you can't just get from a Google search about a company. So definitely reach out on LinkedIn, or just the people that you know work at that firm, and just leverage their knowledge to increase your insight to the role, which you can then use in an interview.
Thank you, Malcolm. And Chantel?
I think for me, I would say to be as broad as you can in terms of the different roles within banking and finance that you might find interesting. I know it's quite difficult to really understand what happens in an industry, especially being up in Manchester, but I guess it's really important for you to actually do your due diligence before you take a role, and don't be like me and take a role that you completely hate and then have to try and segue into something that you absolutely love. So it's really key to kind of do that piece as early as you can, and you may actually find a role existed that you hadn't even heard of, and actually that's the kind of role that you are really most suited to. So definitely be as broad as you can in your due diligence for new roles.
Thank you, Chantel. Yusuf?
My advice isn't too dissimilar from Chantel's. What I would say is, if you do go into a role, like firstly, fully try and immerse yourself in that role. And if it's something that you find that you're not particularly enjoying, so obviously I've started my kind of this master's degree like 8 years into my professional career. And even earlier on, there was ample opportunity in the companies that I'd worked for previously to kind of move and do like secondments, which I did, or work abroad for a little bit, or speak to people in other teams and find out about what they do. So essentially, I wouldn't see kind of the decision I'm imagining a lot of the students are having to make right now as the be all and end all. Whilst again, you should fully immerse yourself in your role and figure out if it's the one for you. If it isn't, there's not that much to worry about. There are opportunities to kind of spread your wings and do other things.
Thank you, Yusuf. Janet?
I would say be a yes man. I think there have been so many, looking back at my university experience, there's so many experiences and so many sort of random opportunities that I got just from saying yes to something that I didn't think anything would come out of. Like even mentioning like for the investment fund, I think I saw a post on LinkedIn randomly one day and I thought, why not apply to it? I have nothing else to do. And it could be really interesting to find out more about it. And I found out it was exactly what I was looking for. So I definitely think just sort of pick up anything you can, and anytime you do have an opportunity, the university is filled with all sorts of opportunities. So definitely just do as many things as you can while you're still there.
Yeah, thank you. And Alistair?
Yeah, I think the others have kind of covered everything. I mean, the only thing I can think of adding is, don't be too worried about having everything all planned out for many years ahead. I mean, there's a lot of randomness in anyone's career, and that's fine. And you zigzag your way through it all. So have some flexibility, and don't worry too much about having an exact blueprint in advance.
Thank you so much. So that will bring our session to a close. Emma, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your screen again, just have a couple of last slides. But I just wanted to thank all of our alumni so much for taking the time out this evening to to really share your experiences and your personal insights and professional advice. It's really invaluable. So thank you so much, and thank you to our participants as well for all of your really insightful questions. I hope that you've gained a lot from the answers. Just a quick slide here. If you have registered, you will receive the slides. There's lots of further support and resources in finding out a bit more about the different areas within finance and banking. As Chantel said, it's important to know that there's lots of different areas out there, and lots of support too that Malcolm had mentioned about practice interviews and assessment centres and things. So you can certainly book on and get the preparation and feedback to help you prepare effectively. If we just move to the next slide. So this was one of our Meet the Grad sessions, finance and banking. We have a couple more if anyone's interested throughout March. Again, you will receive the slides if you've registered. We've just got a question there. You'll need to register to receive the slides. Next slide, please. Just a shameless shout out about the Recent Graduate Careers Network. So if you're in your final year or you're a recent graduate, please do join the University of Manchester Recent Graduate Careers Network on LinkedIn for more information about events like this. So next slide. That's good. Just a thank you slide. If anyone has any other questions, there's 2 ways to get in touch with the Careers Service. Emma has put a link in the chat if you wouldn't mind letting us know about today's event and what you thought of today's event by filling out our short feedback form. That would be absolutely fantastic. But yes, the recording will be available on YouTube, as I said, in about a week. And I'd just like to thank everyone again for participating and for our amazing panelists. Thank you so much.